My husband accused me of being unfaithful simply because I was pursuing my dreams. He never expected what I would do next. We had been married for 16 years, a number that still astonishes me when I think about it. 16 years may sound like a throwaway detail in everyday chatter. Oh, we've been married 16 years, but living through each day reveals the depth of life's twists, unexpected turns, and even how a person you've known forever can, all of a sudden, feel completely unfamiliar. My name is Rachel, and my husband, now my ex-husband, was Mark. Together we raised 2 children who joined our lives during those whirlwind early days of marriage when every cent on the grocery list was meticulously planned because money was scarce. We were both young and full of promise. Mark had this ambitious dream of starting his own contracting business, and I was eager to help him achieve it. We had boundless hope, a reservoir of potential, and deep love. For a long stretch, that love formed the unshakable foundation of our lives. Yet, sometimes even the strongest foundations begin to crack when the ground beneath them shifts unexpectedly. I never planned to be a stay-at-home mom in the beginning. I had always envisioned myself carving out a career, perhaps in healthcare, dressing in scrubs or a lab coat each morning, and returning home exhausted but fulfilled. Then the kids came along, and while I adored them from the moment they arrived, I was also caught off guard by how drastically my life's path was redrawn overnight. Life, as it often does, reconfigured itself out of necessity. Mark was pouring every bit of energy into building his contracting business from scratch, and I couldn't help but feel immense pride in his tenacity. I recall the nights he returned home late, his hair dusted with drywall and his clothes speckled with sawdust, yet still brimming with enthusiasm as he explained his new ideas for attracting clients. "This is our ticket, Rach," he'd say, using that special nickname reserved only for me. "This is how we build something for our family." His venture was our lifeline, and it made sense for me to step back from a career and dedicate myself to our home and children. We chose homeschooling initially for its convenience, and soon we both discovered its advantages. A pace that could be tailored, the chance to let our children pursue their own interests, and the comfort of keeping them close during their formative years. I focused on these positives to distract myself from the occasional feeling of being trapped. In the early days, I embraced every aspect of the typical stay-at-home routine: cooking meals, managing the laundry, keeping the checkbook balanced, paying bills, walking the dog, cleaning every nook and cranny, grocery shopping, scrubbing the toilets, scheduling appointments, and the rest. There were moments when I felt like I was running an entire small empire on my own. Meanwhile, Mark was gone from early morning until well after the kids had settled into bed, especially during those early, hectic years. And on weekends, if a job ran late or a client needed extra help, he would volunteer himself again, murmuring, "This is my dream. I can't fail." I tried to understand it at the time. We were united by the same ambition. Or so I believed. I loved him deeply and admired his passion and perseverance, qualities I still hold in high regard. I knew that success wouldn't come overnight. It was a marathon, not a sprint. A lesson my mother often reminded. She saw Mark as a diamond in the rough and would often say, "He works so hard, but don't forget to save some energy for yourself, child." I tried to listen, but with my daily routine revolving around the constant needs of tiny humans, from tying their shoes to teaching them multiplication, it was hard to carve out time for myself. Yet, in the midst of it all, I had purpose. Whenever loneliness or resentment crept in, I shoved those feelings aside, reminding myself that my primary role was to be there for our children and to stand with Mark as partner. As the business began to find its footing, Mark's exhausting schedule eased slightly. With the help of a few staff members, he could work less physically demanding hours and occasionally be home before the kids went to bed. We even managed a few weekend getaways as a family. It felt like the years of relentless focus were finally paying off. But rather than relief, that period sparked a profound restlessness within. With the kids growing older and the success of homeschooling making them more self-sufficient, I suddenly found myself with hours of spare time that I never had during the chaos of early parenting. I started to wonder, what about me? What do I want now that I'm not fighting every moment for every minute? With Mark's tentative support, I decided to return to school. Armed with a few transferable college credits from my late teens, I enrolled in community college to earn an associate's degree, setting my sights on eventually entering nursing school. I had always been drawn to health, captivated by the idea of making a real difference in someone's most vulnerable moments. Returning to school transformed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was suddenly among classmates from all walks of life, some older, some younger, recent high school graduates, and others re-entering education later in life. I made new friends in labs, the library, and even during casual conversations over budget-friendly sandwiches as we commiserated over finals. It was invigorating to engage in discussions that had nothing to do with homeschooling or the relentless demands of home upkeep. Instead, I was immersed in topics like patient care procedure, anatomy, and even volunteering at local clinics. It was in those moments I rediscovered that I was not solely defined as a mother or a wife, but as an individual with her own ambitions and dreams. Initially, Mark expressed support. "I think it's great that you're doing this," he said, reassuring me that he could manage the homeschooling since the kids were older, and he could help out when needed. I was deeply grateful for his quiet encouragement. Even if his messages were brief, a "nice" or "you got this," they meant a lot. However, once I dived into the rigor of the nursing program, everything escalated. The demanding schedule of classes, labs, clinical hours, and endless reading turned my academic life into an all-consuming force. Coupled with my new volunteering commitments, I began spending more time away from home. Almost overnight, the household tasks I once managed seamlessly started to pile up on Mark: grocery shopping, bedtime routines, laundry, and ensuring the kids completed their assignments. I noticed a shift in him. The patience and understanding I'd once taken for granted were replaced by snide remarks and a palpable irritation. At first, his comments were offhand jokes, like, "Oh, I guess the laundry just does itself now," or "I didn't realize the kids' schedules were so complicated." I'd laugh, trying to brush off a twinge of hurt, thanking him with an extra hug. But as time passed, his remarks became sharp, laced with genuine resentment rather than humor. I attempted to discuss the changes with him on quiet, late nights when the house was empty, asking, "Mark, can we talk about these shifts in our lives? How can we make this easier?" Yet, he'd either dismiss me with a grunt or a curt, "I'm fine," and the conversation would evaporate. In hindsight, I see that by letting the silence stretch on, I allowed our grievances to fester into something much more toxic. During these turbulent years, I also began to rediscover my own independence. For a long time, I had clung to Mark, driven by both love and a lingering fear, born from my severe postpartum depression after my second child, a time when I couldn't even face a grocery store without him by my side. But over the past 5 years, therapy and personal growth slowly helped me regain confidence and learn to stand on my own. My time in nursing school introduced me to a vibrant circle of friends, driven, creative, and in need of a break from the intensity of our program. We would grab quick dinners after late labs or catch a movie on rare free evenings. For the first time in a decade, I had a social circle that was entirely my own, filled with inside jokes and shared experiences that weren't tied to home repairs or the kids' homework. This newfound connection fed my soul and slowly rebuilt my sense of self. Mark's reaction to my growing independence was initially playful, a teasing inquiry about whether my new friends were single, or a light comment about me being the mother hen of our group. But soon, his tone shifted. His questions turned into cold stares and accusatory remarks. Even though I was still home most nights, and any outings were infrequent due to my strict schedule of classes, volunteering, and a part-time job during summer shifts, he began to act as if I were neglecting the family. He would grumble things like, "You don't even care about us anymore," or "All you do is hang out with your friends." The tension reached a boiling point when our daily interactions turned into verbal battlegrounds. He started yelling and hurling hurtful names, remarks that cut deep, chipping away at my self-esteem and leaving me walking on eggshells at home. I recall one evening vividly. After a brief movie outing with 2 close classmates, I returned home to find Mark seething, shouting about the time I had come home. Despite having texted him beforehand to warn that the movie might run late, my small gesture of courtesy only seemed to fuel his anger. That night, while I was in the shower, he invaded my privacy by rifling through my phone, accusing me repeatedly of hiding something. Even though I assured him there was nothing to find, his suspicion and cold demeanor brought back haunting memories of past abusive experiences from my teenage years, leaving me feeling unsafe and diminished. I attempted to mend the growing rift by calmly explaining that I was simply evolving. "I'm still here, Mark, just growing," I'd say, hoping to bridge the gap. But my words seemed to threaten him. Every subtle shift in my independence appeared to provoke a sharper reaction. Gradually, I felt worn down, to the point of questioning whether it was even worth fighting to preserve the life we had built together. How could I simply discard 16 years of marriage? We had 2 children, shared dreams, and a history of love that had seen moments of joy, a heartfelt anniversary poem, a spontaneous picnic under the stars in an old pickup truck, and the tender support he offered during my darkest days of postpartum depression. I feared that ending it might shatter our family and leave us all adrift in uncertainty. Ironically, it was Mark's relentless verbal onslaught that ultimately drove us to the brink. I would find myself crying alone, sometimes in the car before heading to my volunteer shift, wondering if this was truly the end. One particularly pivotal evening remains etched in my memory. After a day spent volunteering at a local clinic's pop-up health screening, my friends and I grabbed a quick dinner at a modest burger. I texted Mark to say, "I'm done volunteering. I'll grab dinner and be home by around 9. The kids had leftovers, right?" His silence on the matter left me uneasy, but I assumed he was simply occupied. However, when I pulled into our driveway at 8:30, the house was shrouded in darkness. Entering quietly, I found Mark in the living room, the only light coming from the TV, and the kids already in bed. My greeting, "Hey, I'm home," was met with a cold, distant response. When I asked if he was upset, he replied curtly, "What do you think?" His tone was alien to me. That night erupted into an intense argument that dragged on for over an hour, though it often felt like it was only him shouting while I sat there, struggling to hold back my tears. He demanded details about my dinner plans, questioned why I needed to be out, and accused me of selfishness, claiming I was chasing a fantasy of being young and free. At one point, he even called me a word I had never heard him use before: "You're acting like a real brat." That single word, laden with venom, struck me as if I'd been physically struck. When he finally stormed out, I was left alone with my tears and a deep, aching sense of self-worth that had been chipped away. That confrontation forced me to confront the reality that perhaps this was the end. Could I continue living under the constant threat of his outbursts, always feeling guilty for wanting a life beyond the confines of our home? I had pledged forever to him, and I had taken that vow to heart. But now I questioned whether our union was sustainable. I suggested couples counseling, presenting a list of local therapists in hopes of salvaging what remained of our relationship, but he flatly rejected the idea, dismissing it as a waste of time and shutting down any further discussion. I continued with individual therapy, determined to safeguard my mental health. My counselor would gently probe, asking, "Do you feel safe in your home? Do you feel respected?" And each time, with trembling honesty, I admitted, "No." That admission marked the darkest chapter of my marriage, a realization that our once solid foundation was crumbling under the weight of unresolved tension and unspoken resentments. For all the love and history we shared, I knew deep down that something had to change. My new routines, volunteering, cultivating friendships, and pursuing my budding career in nursing had become too vital to surrender, and Mark, increasingly unable or unwilling to meet me halfway, pushed us ever closer to the precipice. 1 month after I had initially shared my despair on a forum, I mustered the courage to ask him for a separation. I braced myself for the explosive confrontation I expected: tears, shouting, even a slammed door that might shatter a frame. Instead, he simply looked at me, lowered his eyes, and said one word: "Okay." It was as if he too recognized that we were teetering on the edge and was too exhausted or proud to beg me to stay. Within days, I found a small, modest apartment, a 2-bedroom space with a cramped kitchen, outdated cabinets, and a living room that echoed with every sound. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. The lease bore my name and I held the key. That first night, sleeping alone felt surreal. My children joined me as we arranged a half-week custody, and while they were curious about our new home, they also sensed an unspoken sadness. I explained gently that Mom and Dad needed space, assuring them that our love for them remained unwavering. They accepted the explanation as best they could, their resilience shining through despite the change. Part of me had hoped that moving out would prompt Mark to see the gravity of our situation, to inspire him to make amends. But in those early weeks, our communication was limited to the logistics of exchanging the kids or sorting out lingering bills. The emotional walls between us remained intact. Any attempt on my part to suggest therapy or even a simple coffee meeting to discuss our issues was met with a polite dismissal. "No, I'm good." It was a quiet heartbreak, a sorrow born not from explosive fights, but from an empty, resigned acceptance. Paradoxically, living apart proved to be the best decision for both of us. For me, the liberation was undeniable. I was finally free to structure my day without the constant fear of triggering an outburst. I continued my nursing studies, crammed for exams in the solitude of my living, and even though some days were hard, marked by bouts of nostalgia for the family we once had, I began to feel as though I were emerging from a long, dark tunnel into bright, hopeful sunlight. Freed from the relentless tension, I started to flourish, and it seemed Mark was finding his own path to calm as well. Mutual friends later mentioned that he was spending more time with his siblings, had joined a local gym, and even started therapy on his own, though he never directly told me that. When we interacted regarding the children, our exchanges were marked by civility and even occasional humor, a brief laugh over the memory of a kitchen mishap or a playful comment about our kids' inherited quirks. In those moments, it felt as if we had recaptured a fragment of the teamwork that once defined our marriage. Yet, as quickly as those moments appeared, the reality set in. Our old relationship was gone, replaced by a new, more measured dynamic. A few months after I moved out, we made the decision to transition our children from homeschooling to public school. The constant shuffling between two households had become unsustainable, and both Mark and I had our own hectic schedules to manage. Surprisingly, the change was smoother than anticipated. The kids quickly adapted. They made new friends, discovered new interests, and seemed noticeably happier without the constant undercurrent of tension at home. It was as though they had finally been allowed to breathe freely. Even as I mourned the loss of what I once envisioned as our forever, I felt a profound relief, a weight lifted off my shoulder. My counselor described it as a step toward living authentic, free from the need to constantly appease Mark's anger. I even took on a part-time job at the local hospital, working late shifts, which brought its own set of challenges but also a sense of pride in managing my own rent and bills. Though finances remained tight, every decision was entirely my own, and that independence was exhilarating. Ironically, the distance between us allowed Mark and me to rebuild a new kind of rapport. No longer under the same roof, we found it easier to shed the resentments that had built up over the years. We focused on co-parenting, coordinating school events, doctor's appointments, and even sharing a laugh over trivial memories during our children's sports games. In those fleeting moments, we were the old Mark and Rachel, connected by the simple joy of watching our kids thrive. Then, as the moment passed, we would part ways again, each retreating into our own separate lives. As weeks turned into months, it became clear that neither of us was looking back. We were living separate lives, forming a new relationship that centered around our children's well-being. Our marriage, as it once was, had run its course. Eventually, we finalized our divorce in a process that, surprisingly, was more amicable than either of us had feared. We divided our assets, set up a fair child support system, and agreed on visitation schedules, all without a drawn-out legal battle or bitter disputes. We simply accepted that our paths had diverged. And so, here I am, settled in a small but cozy apartment, diligently finishing my nursing program and experiencing a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. It isn't the fairy tale ending I once dreamed of, one where Mark and I would share triumphant moments like a graduation hug or a return to a house filled with laughter. Instead, it's a quieter, more nuanced conclusion. My children are thriving in their new school, making friends and exploring new activities. I too am thriving, rediscovering who I am beyond the labels of Mark's wife and the kid's mom. I won't pretend that it's been easy. There are nights when I cry myself to sleep, overwhelmed by the memory of the family unity we once had, or when an old photo stirs up a poignant ache for what was. But I remind myself that the painful memories of constant fights, the chilling isolation, and the unyielding tension are just as real, and that living in such an environment would have ultimately destroyed us all. Today, Mark and I have evolved into cautious friends. We communicate openly when it comes to the children, though we rarely delve into the specifics of our separation. When we meet, say, to cheer on one of our kids at a soccer game, we exchange a few kind words and share a smile over a long-forgotten joke. It's a testament to the fact that while our marriage may have ended, the commitment to our children remains unbroken. This isn't the happily ever after I once envisioned, where everything reverts to the magic of our early love, but it is a genuine ending that has paved the way for new beginnings. The children are flourishing, I'm finding peace and self-discovery in my studies and work, and Mark appears to have found his own stability. We've both learned that sometimes, even when love remains, the healthiest path forward is to let go and embrace change. Reflecting on the entire journey, from the timid, vulnerable young mother who relied so heavily on her husband, to the determined student reclaiming her identity, to the frightened wife escaping a toxic home, I see how much I have grown. I learned that it's possible to love someone deeply, while also recognizing that you cannot remain with them if the relationship no longer nourishes your soul. I discovered that co-parenting can work when both parents prioritize their children's well-being. And above all, I learned that sometimes forever evolves rather than ends. In short, we separated, and in that separation, we found a new kind of happiness. We now co-parent harmoniously. We're both healthier, and our children are thriving. It wasn't the ending I once desperately hoped for, but it opened the door to a brighter chapter for all of us. And if I were to walk this path again, I wouldn't change a thing. Because sometimes the journey to happiness isn't about holding on, but about having the courage to let go and step into the unknown with hope.